woodland is a deep and sprawling forest, spreading out from the shores of the Great Lake to the high passes of the faraway mountains. It hides dark deeds, ancient ruins, and dangerous creatures. The land, concealed in the trees, is not tame, let alone safe. The closest a denizen of the woodland can come to safety are the clearings, areas where the encroaching trees thin out and the inhabitants of the woodland build their lives. There, they can set up homes and shops and forges and find safety in each other's company. To venture out beyond the security of the clearings and the paths which connect them is to risk running afoul of bandits, foul weather, treacherous terrain, and even more terrible things than these. Fortunately, the paths and clearings are well worn and are patrolled day and night by merchants and armed watches. Few who make their homes in the woodland ever step outside their clearing, preferring the safety of civilization to the danger of the darkness beyond the forest edge. But there are those who do plunge deep into the woods and dwell outside the established clearings and paths. These vagabonds have been part of the woodland for as long as anyone can remember. Outsiders and outcasts, criminals and ideologues, exiles and mercenaries, those who don't fit into the quieter life of the clearings. Vagabonds tend to keep to themselves, wandering the woodland, completing odd jobs and quests to earn their keep. Despite their often helpful nature, however, most of the woodland folk are uneasy around them, as the woods breed scoundrels and vagrants just as often as rangers and adventurers. But while the vagabonds travel among the trees, the clearings play home to many different denizens. From wolves to badgers to squirrels to possums, one can find almost any kind of creature making their home in the glades and the dwells of the woodland. However, some folk are more common than others. While birds are widespread and are found in every clearing, most clearings are predominantly populated by either mice, foxes, or rabbits. Foxes, for their part, are skilled warriors and artisans, capable of honing steel and using it to fight. As such, they often serve as armorers and soldiers when war comes to the woodland, as it often does. Rabbits are the merchants of the woodland, able to move funds and goods easily between the clearings. Further, their trade network is rife with smugglers, so if one ever needs to get anywhere in the forest quickly, it's best to talk to a rabbit. Meanwhile, clearings dominated by mice tend to be poorer, as mice are generally servants and low-level workers. But don't underestimate them because of this. On account of their low station, mice tend to be overlooked, making them excellent spies and saboteurs. And for as long as anyone can remember, the eerie dynasties ruled over it all. It is said that the birds built their homes in the trees, far above the rest of the forest folk, and soon enough believed themselves to be above the other creatures in power and status too. After that, the eerie took control of clearing after clearing, until the dynasties were the reigning institution in all the woodland. But the eerie's nobles and petty tyrants squabbled with each other over control and rulership. Fissures began to form, and wars came to the forest. Eventually, in the Grand Civil War, the eerie dynasties finally tore themselves apart. They were left without enough support, armies, or resources to hold control of much of anything at all, reduced to a single clearing in the far-off corner of the forest. And so, for a time, the citizens of the woodland took charge of their own clearings, and peace returned to the forest. Then, the cats arrived. Armies from the faraway feline empire swept into the now uncontrolled and undefended woodland. Some of the forest folk fought back, but the invaders were well-trained, well-equipped, and too much for any civilian militia to turn away. Their defeat was swift, and soon enough, the Marquis de Cat, dispatched by the Empire's bureaucratic overlords, arrived to take control of the new colony, and the woodland denizens found themselves under the paw of a new aristocracy. Even as the cats were consolidating their rule and establishing new industries, however, a now reunited and resurgent eerie dynasty began to return in force to the woodland. Seizing back power from Marquis forces, they began to try and re-establish their hegemony. They rebuilt roosts in the treetops of the forest's clearings and waged total war against Marquis soldiers. In the midst of this blooming conflict, the simple creatures of the woodland began sharing secrets and new words in the shadows. Foxes began stockpiling weapons, and mice began stealing communications between the officers on all sides of the war. Meetings in root cellars called for a war for freedom, and the fires of a rebellion began to smolder. The name of the Woodland Alliance was whispered across the clearings. And now, in the midst of this great war that threatens the whole of the woodland, even the normally solitary vagabonds are finding it more and more difficult to survive on their lonesome. They're banding together, protecting each other, and forming into groups potent enough that even the great powers of the Eerie and the Marquis are taking notice. The woodland is now poised on the edge of war, and the future is more uncertain than ever as to who will win the day.